I hope that when you die, you will get the punishment you deserve from God.
Those chilling words came from the sole survivor of a massacre that tore her family apart. It was a crime so horrifying that even hardened detectives couldn't hold back their tears. So how could a man, once cheered as a homecoming king, become one of the most reviled figures in Texas history? This video is dedicated to the victims, to ensure their lives are remembered and their stories told in a way that honors them forever. Before we dive into the horror that unfolded on Leaflet Lane, let's talk about who the Stay family really was. Because this wasn't just a headline. This was a family that laughed over breakfast, decorated their lawn for Halloween, and held backyard birthday parties.
The Stay family was I like to refer to them as an anchor family. They're that family in the neighborhood where all the kids go to their house to play. Our family has experienced a great loss at this because there's not a day that will go by where we won't somehow miss them, some experience where we'll miss them.
Stephen Stay was 39 years old, a husband and father who ran his own real estate business. He was reliable, hardworking, and deeply committed to his family. His wife, Katie Stay, was 33, warm, nurturing, and fiercely protective of her children. She believed in second chances and in helping those who needed it. That generosity would later become both a blessing and a tragedy.
And Katie was a lot more talkative. She was also happy, also very caring and loving, a little bit sarcastic, which I think a lot of people appreciated because, it kind of lightens the mood.
Together, they had moved from California to Texas in 2012, hoping for a fresh start. Spring seemed perfect, safe, quiet, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset and neighbors waved from driveways. They had 4 children. Brian, 13, was a student at Schindewolf Intermediate School. Teachers described him as kind-hearted and mature beyond his years. He loved basketball and dreamed of playing in high school. Emily, 9, and Rebecca, 7, were inseparable sisters at Lem Elementary. Emily loved to draw and had a vivid imagination. Rebecca adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. And then there was Zachary, just 4 years old, the baby of the family. He loved dinosaurs, had an infectious giggle, and followed his older siblings everywhere. And then there was Cassidy, 15 years old, a student at Klein Collins High School, thoughtful, mature, and deeply connected to her siblings. As the oldest, she helped with bedtime stories and homework. She was involved in church activities and known as someone who could be counted on. But on that July afternoon, all of that would be tested in the most unimaginable way.
I really like Harry Potter. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Dumbledore says, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light.
July 9th, 2014, was a quiet Wednesday afternoon. The sun was shining and everything felt completely normal. It was meant to be just another ordinary summer day. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, a knock echoed at the door. Cassidy was the one who answered it. Standing outside was a man dressed as a FedEx delivery driver. He carried a clipboard and wore a convincing uniform. But something felt off. His face was familiar, but she couldn't place it. When he asked for her parents, she explained they weren't home yet, so he left. Cassidy closed the door, feeling uneasy but not alarmed enough to call anyone. But he came back. This time, there was no clipboard, no friendly smile. He told her who he was. Ronald Lee Haskell, her ex-uncle, her mother's sister's former husband. The moment Cassidy tried to shut the door, he forced his way inside. Of course, Haskell overpowered her quickly, producing zip ties and duct tape from his pockets. Proof this wasn't spontaneous rage, but a carefully planned attack. He bound her wrists, forced her to lie face down on the living room floor, and waited. Because he wasn't there for just one person. He was there for all of them. One by one, the rest of the family came home. Stephen and Katie arrived first, returning from errands, completely unaware of what awaited them. Haskell ambushed them the moment they stepped through the door. Then the children began arriving: Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and little Zachary, each walking into what should have been the safest place in the world, only to find a nightmare waiting. Each of them was tied up, forced down, no chance to fight, no time to run. Haskell demanded answers from everyone in the room. He wanted to know where Melanie, his ex-wife, had gone. He kept asking where she was hiding and why Katie had helped her escape. When they refused to answer him, his anger quickly grew. Katie would not betray her sister, and Stephen tried to calm him down. That was the moment Haskell lifted his pistol and aimed it at them. One by one, he shot each member of the Stay family in the back of the head, execution style. 13 shots total. Stephen, Katie, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, Zachary, and Cassidy. He tried to erase an entire family, but he failed.
He tied them, put them face down, was asking them about where his wife was. They did not know. He then shot all 7 of them, execution style, in the back of the head.
The youngest child was just 4, the oldest 15. Cassidy, the 15-year-old, survived. She played dead and was able to tell deputies Haskell's next move.
Cassidy's Stay was shot in the head. The bullet fractured her skull and took off the tip of her finger. By all medical accounts, she should have died. But somehow, she stayed conscious. And in that moment, with her family's blood around her, Cassidy made a decision. She would survive. She had to survive. Because if she died, Ronald Haskell would get away with it. So she played dead. Perfectly. She controlled her breathing, making it shallow and silent. She didn't flinch when Haskell walked past her. She didn't move when he checked the bodies. She lay absolutely still as blood ran down her face. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew her only chance was to wait. Haskell stood there, surveying his work. Then he grabbed the car keys and fled, convinced he'd silenced every witness. He had more people to kill. His rampage wasn't over. But the moment the door closed, Cassidy moved. She was in agony. Her head throbbed. Her hand was bleeding. But she forced herself to stand, and she found a phone and dialed 911.
We were contacted by one of the victims, notifying us of the location she believed that he may go from there.
Cassidy provided dispatchers with a detailed and comprehensive description of her attacker. She described Ronald Haskell's physical appearance, the clothing he was wearing, and the exact make and model of the family vehicle he had stolen. Most critically, she warned authorities that Haskell was actively heading toward another relative's home with the clear intention of continuing his killing spree. Her quick thinking and composure under unimaginable circumstances directly saved multiple innocent lives that day. Law enforcement agencies across Harris County responded with remarkable speed and coordination. Within just minutes of receiving Cassidy's emergency call, patrol officers successfully located the stolen Stay family vehicle as it sped through residential neighborhoods. The suspect was driving recklessly toward the home of yet another family member connected to his ex-wife. What followed was an intense, high-speed pursuit that wound through quiet suburban streets filled with families and children. Police units from multiple jurisdictions joined the chase, carefully coordinating their efforts to prevent Haskell from reaching his next intended victims. Eventually, tactical officers deployed spike strips across the roadway ahead of the fleeing vehicle. The metal barbs tore through the tires with devastating effectiveness, shredding the rubber and forcing the car to grind to a halt in a residential cul-de-sac just miles from the Stay home. But even after being surrounded by armed law enforcement, Ronald Haskell refused to surrender peacefully or accept responsibility for his actions. Instead, he retrieved his loaded pistol and pressed the weapon directly against his own head in a desperate final act of control. What began as a routine apprehension transformed into a tense, hours-long standoff that required specialized crisis negotiators and tactical response teams. Trained hostage negotiators worked tirelessly through megaphones and telephone lines, attempting to establish rapport and convince the armed suspect to put down his weapon. The neighborhood was completely evacuated as a precautionary measure while officers maintained their perimeter positions. As daylight faded and the Texas sun began setting over the surrounding homes, negotiators finally achieved a breakthrough in their communication efforts. After what felt like an eternity to everyone involved, Ronald Haskell slowly lowered his firearm and emerged from the disabled vehicle with both hands raised above his head in surrender.
Police were able to beat Haskell to the home of other family members, cornering him in this cul-de-sac. He eventually turned himself into police.
So who was Ronald Lee Haskell, and how did a man once voted homecoming king become one of the most hated names in Texas? Ronald Lee Haskell, Jr. was born in the mid-1950s in San Marcos, California, a coastal city known for its quiet suburban atmosphere and tight-knit community values. Growing up, Haskell appeared to be a completely ordinary, well-adjusted young man who blended seamlessly into his surroundings. He maintained friendships throughout his school years, participated in social activities, and was even popular enough among his peers to be voted homecoming king during his senior year. He had a reputation for being the class clown, someone who could make people laugh and seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. After graduating from high school, Haskell's path took him far from California as he searched for direction and purpose in his life. He spent several years living in Alaska, working various jobs in the oil and gas industry while experiencing the isolation and harsh conditions of life in America's northern frontier. The rugged Alaskan lifestyle suited him for a time, but eventually he grew restless and sought something more stable and spiritually fulfilling. By the early 2000s, he had relocated to Utah, where he became actively involved with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church community welcomed him warmly, and it was through regular attendance at religious services and church social events that he met Melanie K. Lyon in 2002. Their courtship seemed wholesome and promising by all outward appearances. They shared the same faith, the same values, and the same vision for building a traditional family life centered around their religious community. They married relatively quickly, and over the following years, they had 4 children together. To their fellow church members, neighbors, and extended family, the Haskells appeared to be a model family. But behind the closed doors of their home, away from the watchful eyes of their church community, things were profoundly and disturbingly dark. The first major crack in the facade appeared in June of 2008, when law enforcement was called to the Haskell residence following a violent domestic incident. According to the official police report, Ronald had violently dragged Melanie out of their bed in the middle of the night by her hair and repeatedly struck her on the side of her head with enough force to cause visible injury. And all of this brutal violence occurred while their young children were present in the home, able to hear their mother's screams and witness their father's rage. When responding officers arrived at the scene, they found Melanie visibly injured, shaking with fear, and terrified to remain in the same house with her husband. The children were traumatized, having witnessed domestic violence that no child should ever have to see. Haskell was formally arrested and charged with multiple serious offenses, including domestic violence in the presence of a child, simple assault, and creating an environment of terror within his own home. These were significant charges that carried the potential for substantial prison time and could have served as a critical intervention point to prevent future violence. However, as happens far too often in the American justice system, Ronald Haskell was offered a plea deal that dramatically reduced his legal consequences. He entered a guilty plea to the lesser charge of simple assault, while the more serious domestic violence charges were dropped entirely in exchange for his cooperation. His punishment consisted merely of probation, court-ordered anger management classes, and a criminal record that would do little to actually protect his family. It was nothing more than a slap on the wrist for a dangerous man, and predictably, the pattern of abuse continued unchecked. By July of 2013, After enduring years of escalating physical and emotional abuse, Melanie had finally reached her breaking point. She took the courageous step of filing a formal protective order against Ronald, documenting in legal testimony the years of terror, violence, and control she had endured throughout their marriage. Just 1 month later, in August, she filed for divorce, officially ending their toxic relationship. The protective order was eventually dropped as part of the divorce negotiations in favor of a mutual restraining order, a legal compromise that theoretically protected both parties, but in reality left Melanie vulnerable. The divorce was finalized on Valentine's Day of 2014, an ironically bitter date for the official end of such a destructive marriage. In the final settlement, Melanie was awarded primary custody of their 4 children, while Ronald was granted limited visitation rights. Desperate to escape and start over, Melanie reached out to her sister, Katie Stay, explaining her situation and asking for help relocating far away from her abusive ex-husband. Katie and her family welcomed Melanie with open arms, demonstrating the kind of unconditional love and support that defines true family bonds. They helped her find affordable housing in the Houston area, assisted with childcare during her transition, provided emotional support during her darkest moments, and helped her rebuild her shattered life piece by piece. But while Melanie was finally beginning to heal and move forward, Ronald Haskell was seething with uncontrollable rage. He saw Melanie's escape not as her fundamental right to safety and freedom, but as an unforgivable betrayal that wounded his pride and challenged his sense of control. And in his increasingly twisted and paranoid mind, the people who had helped her escape his grasp, especially Katie Stay and her family, were just as guilty as Melanie herself and deserved to be punished. Just 1 week before the massacre that would shock the nation, something deeply chilling occurred. On July 2, 2014, Haskell's own mother, Carla Jean Haskell, walked into the San Marcos Police Department with a desperate request. She wanted a restraining order against her own son, a request that speaks volumes about how dangerous and unstable Ronald had become. According to her official statement to police, Ronald had confronted her in their family home about the fact that she had maintained contact with Melanie following the divorce. What began as a heated argument rapidly escalated into something far more sinister and violent. He physically grabbed his elderly mother, forcibly dragged her into the garage of their home, bound her wrists tightly with duct tape, strapped her to a computer chair, and held her captive as a prisoner in her own home for nearly 4 terrifying hours. During this prolonged captivity, he paced back and forth, ranting incoherently about Melanie, the divorce, and how everyone in his life had betrayed him. He explicitly threatened to kill his entire family, his mother, his father, his siblings, and anyone else who had dared to stay in contact with his ex-wife. Carla later told investigators that she genuinely believed her son was capable of following through on these threats and feared for her life. Law enforcement took her report seriously and immediately began searching for Ronald Haskell to serve him with emergency protective orders. But despite their efforts, they couldn't locate him anywhere in the San Marcos area. He had completely vanished without a trace, abandoning his home, disconnecting his phone, and disappearing from all his usual haunts. What no one knew at that critical moment was that he was already on the road, driving the nearly 2,000 miles from California to Texas, with murder on his mind. He was already plotting mass murder, already planning every detail of his attack, already preparing to annihilate the family that had helped his ex-wife escape. The warning signs had been flashing like emergency beacons for years. Multiple arrests, protective orders, threats of violence, and finally his own mother desperately seeking protection from him. But it was too late to stop what was already in motion. Just 1 day after the massacre on July 10, 2014, Ronald Lee Haskell was formally charged with 6 counts of capital murder. He would be facing the death penalty. On July 11th, during his first court appearance, something strange happened. As the charges were read, Haskell began to shake. Then he collapsed to the floor. Deputies rushed to lift him. He stood, then collapsed again. He had to be wheeled out on a stretcher. The man who had coldly executed an entire family now appeared unable to stand and face the consequences. Over the next few years, the trial was delayed repeatedly. Defense attorneys filed motions, psychiatric evaluations, competency challenges. The trial didn't begin until August of 2019. 5 years after the crime, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. Cassidy's 911 call, forensic analysis, ballistics reports, and testimony from Cassidy herself. She took the stand. She looked Ronald Haskell in the eye, and she told the jury exactly what happened. On September 26, 2019, the verdict came in. Guilty. 6 counts of capital murder. The jury had no doubt. 2 weeks later, on October 11th, Haskell was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Today, he sits on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky unit near Livingston, Texas. A man who tried to destroy an entire family, but failed to silence the one person strong enough to survive. In the aftermath, the community came together to mourn. The funeral for Stephen, Katie, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zachary was held at the Hare Road Chapel in Sugar Land, Texas. More than 1,000 people attended. Photos of the children stood near their caskets. Flowers covered every surface. It was a testament to how deeply this family had touched lives. Days later, another memorial was held at Lem Elementary, where Emily and Rebecca had been students. Classmates left messages, drawings, and flowers. The school created a permanent memorial garden in their honor. But through the darkness, one light remained: Cassidy's stay. Within days, Cassidy became a symbol of resilience. A GoFundMe campaign drew more than 16,000 donors, raising over $400,000 to help rebuild her life. She was released from the hospital just 2 days after the shooting. Her physical wounds were raw. Her emotional wounds were just beginning. But she stood tall. Weeks after the massacre, Cassidy spoke publicly at a memorial service. Standing before hundreds, her voice steady, she quoted Harry Potter's Albus Dumbledore. "Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light." The crowd stood and applauded for nearly 5 minutes, because in that moment, Cassidy reminded everyone that hope is a choice. Years later, during Haskell's sentencing hearing, Cassidy faced him again. She was no longer the terrified teenager. She was a young woman who had rebuilt her life. She looked him in the eye and spoke.
I've always wanted to know how you felt about me and what kind of remorse you felt. And my family always said that you only felt sorry for yourself, and I didn't want to believe that because I thought, surely he has to feel bad for killing my family. And when I heard that you felt no remorse, something changed inside of me. And I didn't know what to do with that change, and it was causing me a lot of hurt and anger because that was my closure. My closure was the hope that you would feel bad. I no longer have the desire for any closure because this is it. There's nothing left on this earth that will soothe my wounds and worries. Only God can help me now. And that's what I've decided to do with my resentment and my anger towards you. I'm letting go of my emotions, and I'm giving it to God, because He'll take care of me and He'll help me through this. The jury decided that you were going to die by lethal injection, and I respect their decision. Do I think the punishment fits the crime? No. I hope that when you die, you will get the punishment you deserve from God. Only God can help you now.
But Ronald Haskell felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse. And Cassidy realized her closure wouldn't come from him. It would come from within, from her survival, from her testimony, from the lives she saved. She later told reporters she had forgiven Ronald Haskell, not for his sake, but for hers. She refused to give him power over her life. She chose to move forward, to honor her family by living fully. Today, Cassidy lives a private life. She has completed her education. She has surrounded herself with loved ones. And while the scars will never fully fade, she has proven that survival is about choosing to live. Now, after years of covering true crime, we've learned that violence involving a brother-in-law isn't rare. In the next case, the situation is hauntingly similar, but this time, there is no survivor. They say, be careful who you let into your home. But here's a question. If you were Cheryl, would you open your door in the middle of the night for your ex-convict brother-in-law? Well, this video says it all. On the 22nd of July, 1977, Connecticut witnessed what was at the time its largest mass murder, a crime so horrifying that the state's Supreme Court described it as brutal and apparently motiveless. And trust me, the gruesome details will haunt you long after you hear them. And we're not here to sensationalize. It's raw, real, and devastating. And just like always, we're peeling back the layers of this nightmare to uncover what really happened to the Bodwain family. Let's start by getting to know the family and their world. The Bodwain family lived in a small, tight-knit community on Cedar Hill Drive in Prospect, Connecticut. Back in 1977, this little town had a population of just over 6,500 people. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, and the charm of rural life created a sense of peace and safety. This close-knit vibe might seem like a small detail, but trust me, it plays a key role in what unfolded later. Now, let's talk about the Bodwain household because it wasn't just your typical family. There were 10 people living under one roof. At the head of the family was Frederick Bodwain, the father, and Cheryl, the mother, who was only 29 at the time. Together, they had 7 children ranging from toddlers to preteens. The eldest, 12-year-old Frederick Jr., was followed by 10-year-old Sharon Lee, 9-year-old Deborah Ann, 8-year-old Paul, 6-year-old Roderick, 5-year-old Holly Lynn, and 4-year-old Mary Lou. If that wasn't enough, their 6-year-old niece, Jennifer Santoro, also lived with them. With so many young lives in the mix, their home must have been a lively and chaotic place, full of the everyday ups and downs of a big family. And as you can imagine, the Bodwain family had a pretty lively and fun time together, and that was definitely true on the night of Thursday, July 21st, 1977. The 8 kids were enjoying themselves, swimming and playing around in their neighbor's pool in Prospect, Connecticut. The air was filled with laughter, splashes, and carefree moments, just a typical summer evening. Now, life for the Bodwain family wasn't exactly about luxury, but they weren't struggling either. They had enough to get by and were grateful for what they had. Despite not being wealthy, they created a warm, loving home that radiated happiness. On that particular night, Cheryl, the mom, was keeping an eye on the kids while they were having a blast at the pool. Meanwhile, Frederick Bodwain, the father, was working his 3rd shift at the Pratt & Whitney factory, trying to provide for his family. But then, things took an unexpected turn when a man showed up at the pool. Now, this man was no stranger. In fact, the kids were thrilled to see him. The neighbor recalled how they all rushed over to greet him, showering him with hugs and kisses. It was clear that he was someone they knew well and trusted. After a little while, the kids wrapped up their fun in the pool and went home with this man, while the neighbor went inside, and the evening continued as it would for any other family. But little did anyone know, this night would soon take a dark and tragic turn that would change everything forever. Around 4:15 in the morning, the quiet of the early hours was shattered when neighbors started to smell smoke. At first, they thought it might be someone burning leaves or trash. But then they heard something far more alarming, screams coming from the Bodwain house. That's when they realized something was seriously wrong and quickly called 911 to report the fire. Fire trucks from both Prospect and the nearby town of Bethany rushed to the scene, sirens piercing through the night. The firefighters worked tirelessly, and after about 30 minutes, they managed to extinguish the blaze. But what came next was something no one could have prepared for. As the smoke cleared and the flames died down, firefighters began searching the house. Inside, they discovered an unspeakable tragedy. The bodies of Cheryl Bodwain, her 7 children, and her 6-year-old niece, Jennifer Santoro, were found throughout the home. Each one had been brutally killed before the fire. Cheryl's charred body was found on the kitchen floor. 3 of the children were discovered in one bedroom, while 2 more were in another. 1 child was found in the master bedroom, and 2 more were located in the bathroom. The scene was nothing short of horrifying. Adding to the nightmare, many of the victims, including Cheryl, had their hands tied behind their backs. 2 of the children had their feet bound, and everyone appeared to have suffered severe head injuries before the fire consumed their bodies. It was a crime of unimaginable cruelty, and the sheer brutality shocked even the most experienced investigators. All of the bodies were burned extensively, said Edward P. Leonard, the state police commissioner at the time. His statement only hinted at the unimaginable horror that firefighters and police had witnessed. Some neighbors later admitted they had woken up to the smell of smoke but didn't immediately think much of it. It wasn't until they heard the chilling screams that they realized the danger and called for help. One neighbor, Joseph Paulino, tried to help. He ran to the Bodwain house and attempted to enter, but the fire was already too intense. He later recounted the terrifying scene, saying, "I opened the back door and got driven back by a blast of heat. Then the picture window blew out." As mentioned earlier, Frederick Bodwain, the father of the family, was at work at the Pratt and Whitney factory in North Haven, working the 3rd shift. Around 5:30 in the morning, police arrived at his workplace to pick him up. They didn't tell him what had happened, only that he needed to come with them. They drove him to his mother's house, where the family's Reverend Joseph Donnelly was waiting to deliver the devastating news. After hearing it, Frederick turned to Reverend Joseph with a question that no parent or spouse should ever have to ask: "Are they all dead?" Joseph's somber response confirmed his worst fears. Everything Frederick held dear, his wife, his children, his entire family, was gone in one horrifying night. Shattered by grief, he reportedly said through tears, "There's only one thing, to see the bastard pay." But while Frederick was dealing with this unimaginable loss, investigators were already working tirelessly to find answers. They set up a command post at Prospect Town Hall and began stopping every car traveling along Route 68. They were determined to leave no stone unturned. Additionally, back at the Bodwain home, police continued their investigation. That's when they noticed something strange. All the doors and windows were locked. This raised an alarming question. How could the killer have escaped if everything was locked from the inside? It pointed to the chilling possibility that whoever committed the crime was already inside the house or somehow locked the doors behind them. Naturally, the investigators started talking to neighbors. That's when they learned about a man named Lorne Acquin, the very same man who visited while the kids were enjoying their time at the neighbor's pool. But that wasn't all. The neighbors said they saw him again early Friday morning, sitting alone in a black sedan parked in a nearby church parking lot, about a mile from the house. This information raised red flags for the investigators. Who was this man? And why was he hanging around the house before and after the tragedy? The neighbors filled in more details about Lorne's connection to the Bodwain family. As it turns out, he wasn't just some random figure on the periphery of their lives. For about 2 years, he had actually lived in their basement. Then, out of the blue, he left, vanished from their lives. But just as abruptly as he had disappeared, he reappeared on that fateful Thursday night, the same night the Bodwain kids had been swimming at the neighbor's pool. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Meanwhile, investigators couldn't afford to overlook anyone, not even Frederick, the grieving father. In the early stages of any investigation, the people closest to the victims are often scrutinized. So when officers asked Frederick for permission to search his truck, He didn't hesitate. He had nothing to hide. The search came up clean. No evidence, no suspicious items. But it was a necessary step in ruling him out. By the time the investigation hit the 24-hour mark, it was already a whirlwind of activity. Police weren't wasting a second. They had set up roadblocks, spoken to neighbors, and interviewed over 100 witnesses, including both Frederick and Lorne. Every detail was critical, and no piece of information was too small to be considered. However, when officers ran Lorne Acquin's name through their system, what they uncovered was far more troubling than anything they had heard from the neighbors. This wasn't just a man with a few minor run-ins with the law. His criminal record revealed a pattern that painted him as someone with a dangerous, unpredictable streak. In April of 1974, Lorne was sentenced to prison for larceny. He served less than a year before being released in February of 1975, but freedom didn't suit him for long. By March of 1976, he was back behind bars after attempting to escape custody, a desperate and reckless act that hinted at his bold, unrestrained nature. After serving time for that charge, he was paroled in September of 1976. Now here's the part that truly raised red flags. When the tragedy at the Bodwain house happened, Lorne had only been out of prison for 7 months. 7 months. That's hardly enough time to rebuild a stable life, let alone prove himself as a changed man. And yet, here he was, connected to the scene of one of the most devastating crimes the community had ever witnessed. For investigators, the timing and circumstances surrounding Lorne's reappearance were impossible to ignore. His criminal past, combined with his strange behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy, created a picture that was hard to dismiss. Why had he returned to the Bodwain home after being gone for so long? Why was he spotted sitting in a black sedan in a nearby church parking lot the morning after the fire? To make matters even more intense, investigators uncovered a shocking twist. Lorne wasn't just some random person with a criminal past. He was actually Frederick's foster brother. Talk about a wild turn of events. On the morning of July 22nd at around 9:30 a.m., investigators went over to Lorne's apartment, asking him to come in for questioning. To everyone's surprise, he agreed without hesitation. He calmly went with them to the police station, but what happened next took everyone off guard. Lorne didn't just answer questions, he laid it all out. He was ready to confess. And he didn't just give some vague or wishy-washy response. Instead, he gave a chilling, detailed account of the crime that sent shivers down everyone's spine. He admitted to attacking his sister-in-law and the children. To make sure they were on the right track, police didn't just stop at one round of questioning. They asked him the same questions 3 different times, and each time, his story stayed exactly the same. Even when they brought in his psychiatrist to talk to him, Lorne didn't back off from his confession. At this point, it was clear as day. Lorne was the one responsible. He was arrested and charged with 9 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. But the investigators weren't taking any chances. They made him write up a full confession, a 7-page document that spelled out every detail of what had happened. The facts were so specific and accurate that no one else could have known them, certainly not from the news or outside sources. It was all from Lorne himself. But that's not where the story ended. Later that day, on July 23rd, investigators found even more damning evidence. A trash bag filled with bloody clothes was found near Lorne's driveway, and even more chilling, bloody shoes and socks were discovered in the trunk of his car, the very same car that people had seen him parked in at the church the night of the crime. All of this lined up perfectly with what Lorne had confessed. The evidence was stacking up like a mountain, pointing directly at him. But if you'd think that at this time the case was closed and Lorne is locked up for good, well, not quite. Things were about to take another unexpected turn. Even though everything seemed to be going in the direction of a quick conviction, Lorne's defense team wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. They were still looking for ways to create doubt, to turn the tide in their favor. While the evidence against him was stacking up, his confession, the bloody clothes, the witnesses, his lawyer was fighting tooth and nail to poke holes in the prosecution's case. John R. Williams wasn't going to let it slide without putting up a serious challenge. Even with everything seemingly pointing to Lorne's guilt, the defense team started pushing for a delay, arguing that the court had overstepped by requesting a blood sample from Lorne without solid evidence. They wanted the confession and the blood evidence excluded from the trial, and they tried to introduce new theories like the possibility that Cheryl's brother might be the real killer. But the court wasn't buying it. They saw the evidence for what it was, clear, consistent, and chilling, and refused to allow the defense to shift the focus elsewhere. The trial continued as planned, and when the jury was finally sworn in on July 16, 1979, it felt like the final chapter was getting closer. Then came the day everyone had been waiting for, the public reveal of Lorne's confession. And let me tell you, it didn't disappoint. It was a detailed, gruesome account of everything he had done. Lorne confessed to killing Cheryl, her children, and others, describing each moment with cold precision. He even talked about how he went to the house in the evening to pick raspberries with the kids before the violence began. It was hard to believe, but Lorne's story didn't end there. According to him, after leaving the house around 8:30 p.m., he came back in the early hours of the morning, around 2 or 3 a.m., slipping inside through the unlocked basement door. Once in the kitchen, he casually turned on the light, and that's when Cheryl came down to see what was going on. According to Lorne, she didn't seem too surprised to see him, and when he asked to grab some tools from the basement to fix his car, she let him go without a second thought. But things quickly took a deadly turn. After getting the lug wrench, Lorne came back upstairs and asked Cheryl for a beer. She didn't think anything was off about it. After all, he was family, right? But the moment she turned her back to get the beer, Lorne hit her over the head with the lug wrench. And that wasn't the end of it. He kept swinging, hitting her over and over again without hesitation. The worst part? Lorne claimed Cheryl didn't make a sound. She didn't scream, didn't cry for help. I can't even imagine what was going through her mind at that moment. Was she trying to stay quiet so she wouldn't alert her children? Was she hoping to survive this attack without drawing attention? Unfortunately, it didn't work. One of the kids heard the noise and rushed to the kitchen, only to be struck by Lorne with the same wrench. From there, he went on to attack the other children, using the wrench and a tire iron. But when he heard Cheryl moaning in the kitchen, meaning she was still alive despite the brutal blows, he went back and started stabbing her. Lorne later confessed to the police that he tied up some of the children with string and then tragically assaulted 10-year-old Sharon before killing her. Just think about the horror this poor child experienced. Beaten senseless and then assaulted at just 10 years old. After all of that, he drenched everyone, Cheryl and the children, in gasoline and set the entire house ablaze. However, when Lorne took the stand on September 5, 1979, his story took a complete turn. He denied everything he had confessed to. He said, "I didn't do any of that." He claimed that he only signed the confession because his psychiatrist told him it would be better for him. According to Lorne, the psychiatrist had said, "You'd be better off if you signed." Lorne also claimed that he repeatedly requested a lawyer during his interrogation, expressing his desire to speak with one over and over. However, the police repeatedly denied his requests, insisting that they already knew he was guilty. They urged him to simply confess, convincing him that it would be better for him if he did. When questioned about the bloodstains on his clothes, Lorne offered an unusual explanation. He claimed that the blood wasn't from the murders, but from a fight he had gotten into the night of the killings. According to Lorne, he had been out for coffee when some men outside the cafe attacked him. In retaliation, he said he fought back and ended up beating them. That's where the blood came from, he insisted. It was a strange and highly unlikely story that left many people skeptical of his account. The situation took an even more bizarre turn when Lorne described his reaction upon learning about the murders. He stated that when the police first informed him about the killings, he was so enraged that he punched a wall in the police barracks. He claimed that in his anger, he warned the state trooper, telling him that they better catch the killers before he did. Now, during the trial, the prosecutors introduced a photo of the 7 murdered children showing their innocent faces, which had never been seen by the jury before. This photograph led Lorne's lawyer to argue for a mistrial, suggesting that the emotional impact of the image could unfairly influence the jury's opinion. However, the judge dismissed the motion, and the trial continued without interruption. As the case progressed, certain pieces of evidence seemed to lend some credibility to Lorne's version of events. For instance, the way he reacted when first informed of the murders mirrored exactly what he had claimed in his confession. This alignment raised questions about whether he had actually committed the crimes or if he had been coerced into admitting to them. Moreover, a state police fingerprint expert testified during the trial that the bloody handprint found in the bathtub wasn't Lorne's. In fact, the handprint on one of the door jambs didn't match his either. This revelation raised further doubts about his involvement, particularly since the prints didn't match any of the victims, or even Frederick, the father. There was also the matter of a prior interview with Lorne, conducted in October of 1977 by reporter Lincoln Milstein from the local newspaper, The Current. This interview, which had been kept under wraps until the confession was released, revealed even more contradictions. Lorne admitted to Milstein that he had no recollection of the killings. The only things he remembered were vague snippets: talking to Cheryl, seeing bodies and blood everywhere, and the house being on fire. He claimed that he had been so frightened and confused by what had happened that he didn't remember the events clearly. However, things took a turn in October 1977 when Lorne was transferred to a state mental hospital in Middleton for security reasons, and a few weeks later, he was officially committed. A psychiatrist testified that he might be suffering from schizophrenia or epilepsy, raising doubts about his mental state at the time of the confession. With this in mind, some argued that his statements were unreliable, and this further questioned his accountability for the crimes. Fast forward to October 1979, the jury deliberated for hours over the course of 3 days before finding Lorne guilty on all counts of murder. They did not charge him with SA, despite speculation that he might have been driven to kill after feeling ashamed of allegedly molesting one or more of the Bodwain girls. Chief Assistant State's Attorney Walter Scanlon suggested this could have been the motive, although it was never definitively proven. The state tried to get the maximum possible prison sentence of 245 years, which is 25 years for each murder and 20 years for arson. But Judge Walter Pickett sentenced Lorne to 105 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 or 55 years. The decision was made, but it didn't take long before Lorne's attorney filed an appeal. So quickly, in fact, that it seemed as though the appeal had been pre-written and ready to go. However, the court denied his appeal, and Lorne was sent to prison. Over the years, Lorne continued to fight his conviction, filing petitions for a habeas corpus trial. Despite his efforts, each petition was rejected, and his legal battles seemed to go nowhere. And for those unfamiliar with the term habeas corpus, it refers to a writ used to bring an accused person from a different jurisdiction to the court in the place where the crime occurred, essentially allowing for the review of the case. In Lorne's case, he argued that he was wrongfully convicted and that his confession should not have been used against him. Lorne was eventually transferred to McDougall Walker Correctional Facility in Suffield, Connecticut, where he spent 38 years behind bars. During this time, he accumulated 8 disciplinary offenses, including assault, possession of drugs, contraband, and other violations. His last infraction occurred in 1997 when he was charged with assault and refusing to provide a specimen. Then, in June of 2015, Lorne's health took a drastic turn. He was placed on a ventilator in the intensive care unit after suffering a severe medical crisis. As the Department of Correction indicated, Lorne had no family willing or able to make medical decisions for him. The judge was called to make a decision regarding his care, but before the meeting could take place, Lorne passed away from a severe brain bleed. He was 65 years old at the time of his death, having entered prison at the age of 27. His death remained shrouded in mystery, as no autopsy was performed and the cause of the brain bleed was never determined. Following his death, Robert DeClark, the former owner of the funeral home, sought and received custody of Lorne's remains. After performing a cremation, Lorne's ashes were stored, and DeClark periodically brought them to the Department of Correction in the hopes of finding any relatives who might come forward. But no one did, and to be honest, it feels like Lorne got exactly what he deserved: alone and forgotten. No child, not even Cheryl, deserves a death like that. The violence, the cruelty, it's almost impossible to wrap your mind around. The lingering heartbreak must have been unbearable for the remaining family, especially Fred, the father. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching realization that it was his own foster brother who had claimed the lives of his loved ones? It must have been indescribable. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. Was the sentence just, or did Lorne somehow slip through the cracks with a punishment that didn't quite fit the crime? I'd really love to know what you think about all this. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.